the truth is that it's complicated, right? It's a nuance, just like everything else in society. Everything has a carbon footprint. Anything that you add to the electrical grid could potentially bring on more fossil fuels in the short term. The question is, in the long term, is that particular type of load or demand that you bring onto the grid, is it going to make it easier for you to bring on renewables later on or support a renewable energy-based electrical grid? I think that there is enough evidence that because Bitcoin mining is a very flexible load in the sense that it can turn on and turn off within seconds, and if you can take it off, like you can power it down almost 97%, I think, somewhere around there, and you will not have any negative effect on the network. I think that is a really important point about why Bitcoin mining and why Bitcoin isn't bad for the planet, because as you add more renewable, variable renewable energy, which would be solar and wind, as you put more solar and wind onto the electrical grid, it becomes harder for the grid operators to manage it on the supply side, which is how they always used to do it. So you have to manage things on the demand side. And if you can power down something that requires a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, at times where there's an emergency or there's peak demand and the generation power plants can't meet that demand, you suddenly have a really fantastic, very flexible tool that can release that power back when it's needed. So it's like a grid insurance in that regard. It's like it's there, it's paying for this power to exist, and then it returns it when you actually need it. So it's kind of like peaker plants in a way, where like peaker plants get paid to just exist. They're also like a grid insurance. They just exist. They're there. They're not operating. Maybe they operate like 15% of the time during the year, right? But they're still getting paid, because if you didn't pay them, who would maintain that operation in the downtime when it's not needed? You know, you have to make sure that it's going to be ready for that one moment when you need it. And it may only be 15% of the time. But in that 15%, it was essential to have that available. And so it's kind of the same idea. You have to pay for these things. It's just inevitable that you have to pay to maintain this reserve power somehow. So in that sense, you know, Bitcoin is good because it helps on the monetary costs, I think it makes that aspect more efficient, reduces the cost for the grid operators. So I think in that regard, it's good. And demand response programs have also been shown to be helpful in reducing carbon emissions for the electrical grid. They can, because they also make it easier to bring on renewable energy, like I said. So in that aspect, that's good. The other aspect is that you can create a revenue floor with Bitcoin mining by co-locating it with solar farms or wind farms. And we're really starting to see that happen now. Soluna Holdings, which is they're like a data center kind of company, but their main focus is right now is using Bitcoin mining in their data centers. And so what they do is they target these solar farms or wind farms that are not meeting their revenue expectations, or they don't have enough off-takers for their excess power for whatever reason, or they're not able to make use of all the tax breaks that they could be getting because they're running a renewable power plant. By integrating Bitcoin mining, co-located, which means like off the grid, getting a certain percentage of that power from that renewable generator, that renewable power plant is able to meet its revenue needs and its payback on its return on investment. You know, all that is really important. These are market systems. This is, a market society it's a for-profit thing, and you have to find a way to make it so that the renewable energy plants don't, go bankrupt, basically. And Juan, maybe it's not clear, but solar farms and wind farms will all, in the same region, they will all produce power at the same time. So not wind and solar, like wind and solar tend to produce power at different times, but like if there's 5 solar farms all in the same region, they will all produce the same amount of solar at the same exact time. So it becomes like an almost perfectly competitive market, which inevitably is going to drive down the prices. So how do you sustain that, right? How do you sustain that? It's hard. So you need some way to do that, and Bitcoin is one way to do that, to create that revenue floor. And so again, that goes back to like the whole conversation about markets, and not, being like an anti-capitalist and being pro markets, but also, recognizing that you need markets as a tool to change the incentives. You can do that with Bitcoin mining. You're changing the incentive structure through the market system, and in a very grassroots way that doesn't require government intervention, doesn't require new regulation, doesn't require new subsidies. I think that's really cool, and very innovative and clever, and should be commended, because that is going to help us with the renewable energy transition. The third one, and then I think that'll wrap up this question. Sorry, it's really long answer.
But it's important to know about this.
Yeah. The third part is on the methane mitigation side, which, there's some tricky things here. It's also against, again, a nuanced discussion and requires more research. But basically the idea is you have a lot of methane going up into the air that isn't being captured. It's being vented. And it happens at landfill sites or agricultural sites. These waste sites are a pretty significant portion of human caused methane emissions. And if there's human methane, like humans create methane emissions through our civilization and all of the infrastructure that we have and the requirements we have to sustain it. And then there's methane emissions that are just natural part of the cycle, the life cycle of the planet. Mm-hmm. But we have these emissions from landfills, livestock farms, and they're not being captured. And so that methane goes into the atmosphere. And over a 20-year period, methane is like 87 or 84 times more potent in its warming effect than carbon dioxide. And in the last IPCC reports, the scientists concluded that methane is playing a bigger role than we realize in warming the planet. So we have to address methane mitigation as well as carbon dioxide mitigation. And mitigation just means reducing those emissions. Mm-hmm. So one way you can do that is capture it, combust it in a generator, and power some Bitcoin miners. What comes out of it is still CO2. You still have carbon dioxide entering the atmosphere, but in comparison, in the short term, that is going to be a lot less impactful. And what that means is that it can buy us a little more time for the energy transition and for bringing on direct air capture and other carbon capture systems, carbon capture storage systems, right? So the idea is let's buy ourselves some time. Let's be real about the situation that we're in. It's not the ideal situation where people are going to cooperate and governments are going to cooperate and everybody's just going to do the right thing. That's not what's happening. And we have to face that reality. So we have to do some things in the short term that will reduce those emissions and at least reduce the immediate impact of those emissions so that we have enough time to address them in a more permanent way. So in that sense, if you set up some Bitcoin miners on a landfill site, you are incentivizing the ability to build out that electric infrastructure that otherwise would not have been incentivized. And then you are able to mitigate the methane at that site or at a livestock waste site. And you have a net benefit here in the sense that, one, you're reducing those methane emissions, and two, in the future, you can then do other things with that infrastructure, right? It doesn't require Bitcoin to be there forever. Bitcoin miners could go someplace else. Mm-hmm. Or Bitcoin could just, disappear at some point, but you would still have that infrastructure. And then what do you do with that infrastructure? There's a company called Vespine that is using Bitcoin in exactly this way, where they're trying to use it to incentivize the build out of the infrastructure that's required. And then they're going to use it for electric vehicle chargers. So I think that's really cool. So we need to see that there's actually really cool, creative bottom-up solutions. We don't have to defer to the powers that be. We can find these solutions ourselves. We can solve climate change ourselves. And we don't have to sit on the sidelines and pray that the government does the right thing. We don't have to. And I think because of that, because these are all good things that Bitcoin can do, and in a lot of ways is already starting to do, it can give you hope that you have some power to change society and to change the direction that we're going in. So that's why I think Bitcoin is actually not what people, what is written about it in the news. I think it's a much more different story, a much more hopeful one too.